Imagine this. You're 8 or 9 years old, you're sitting in your classroom, and your teacher starts telling you that you need to deconstruct your racial and sexual identity and then rank yourself according to power and privilege. You're 8 or 9. Chris Rufo brings us this scoop today on The Reason We Learn. A Cupertino elementary school forces third graders to deconstruct their racial and sexual identities, then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. So what I just described, happening. He says, I've obtained exclusive whistleblower documents from inside the classroom. They will shock you. I wish they did. They don't. That's the problem. They don't shock me. This doesn't shock me. And I can't count on people to go do a deep dive on this channel and look in the past to other videos that show similar kinds of lessons. So I have to keep bringing this stuff to you over and over again because I'm hoping to reach as many people as possible, or as many parents, as many teachers who might not be in a district doing this yet, to raise awareness so that hopefully you can push back before it comes to your district, or if it is coming to your district, so you can see, no, you're not an isolated situation. This is happening all over the country, and it's wrong. It's racist. It's pedagogically insane. It's verbally abusive. It just should never happen. It should not be happening. Parents need to get their kids away from this because this is abusive. So let's look at this. And I hope if you find this kind of content valuable, if you think this is a public service, which I hope you do, I hope you will subscribe to the channel, like the video, share the video, comment on the video, etc. So here's what happened. First, the teacher told the 8 and 9-year-old students that they live in a dominant culture of white, middle-class, cisgendered, educated, able-bodied Christians who created and maintained this culture in order to hold power and stay in power. Now we're going to dissect this because there are so many false premises in here, I don't even know where to start. But I'll start at the beginning. They live in a dominant culture. Okay, they do. That's not bad or good or anything. It is neutral until we start looking deeper into what that means. We do live in a dominant culture, and it's a dominant culture that attracts immigrants from all over the world from different cultures. Now, why is that? Because they find something of value in the dominant culture, or they wouldn't leave their culture to come to it. Some of them come from a culture that's similar, a dominant culture that's similar, because it's Western. So if they come from Europe, they're coming to a similar dominant culture, a Western culture. If they're coming from places that are not Western, then they are saying, I'm leaving the dominant culture in which I was raised or born, and I want to go to this other place with a different dominant culture for reasons, presumably good ones. We do not risk life and limb, abandon everything we know, build a boat out of soda bottles and float through shark-infested waters to an uncertain future. We do not walk through deserts full of scorpions or, wade through a river risking drowning and even being sent back. And all the other things that we're told constantly lead to a better life for people from a different culture. If the dominant culture in the United States is bad, do we? Are those people crazy? Are they wrong? Should we be happy when they're captured and sent back? Are we saving them from this horrible, terrible, no good, very bad dominant culture? Or are we welcoming them to a dominant culture that offers them a better life? You see, because that was the impression I got. Yeah. And Western culture, the dominant culture here, is dominant for a reason, because it works. Western Enlightenment culture gave us the liberal values that are enshrined in our Constitution, in our Bill of Rights, the very things that people are coming from other cultures to get, to benefit from. Does dominant mean exclusive? Does it mean hostile towards other cultures? No, of course it doesn't. We're a pluralistic society. We're a free society. And the beauty of that is the beauty of us having a dominant culture that is Western Enlightenment based is that we are receptive and welcoming of other cultures' contributions to our culture. We hope to weave a fabric that it reflects the beauty and creativity and richness of other cultures without abandoning what makes Western culture great, which are these liberal values. And they are dominant because the people who immigrated to this country wanted to keep them that way. Now you can say, well, they were educated in the schools. Really? I think it would be in spite of the education they got here if public schools are where they got their education. Because I don't think from at least 1920 on that they worked too hard to enshrine the liberal values that we hold dear. That was probably done in other places, the workplace, churches, synagogues, and mosques, and other houses of worship, and neighborhoods across this country where people lived side by side and said, you know what, despite our various differences, we all agree with these values. So let's keep them. Let's keep them because they keep us safe and they keep us healthy and they keep us moving forward. So the idea that we have a dominant culture is not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Now, that it's white, no, that's just a description of the majority population at the moment demographically, and that is changing, that is shifting. We're constantly being told how it's changing. And that is neither good nor bad. It just is. It's changing. It's reality. Okay? So the fact that it is majority white at the moment has nothing to do with it being dominant. It isn't at all. Middle class, I don't understand why that's a problem. That I thought was the American dream. I thought and in fact, I don't even like the term middle class. I don't like breaking us into classes. We have different socioeconomic levels in this country, and they really ought to describe where people are in their progression of advancement. It would be lovely if we could all achieve at similar levels, but people by virtue of choices, by virtue of talents, by virtue of, effort and a whole variety of things that require a nuanced understanding of human beings and the economy and our history and a lot of factors go into that. So the idea that we have and if we do have a dominant culture of a middle class culture, I'm not sure that's necessarily a bad thing. That means the majority of people are in the middle class. That means they have their basic needs provided for. That's what it means. That means the dominant culture is neither rich nor poor. How is that a bad thing? Cisgendered. Yeah, that's biology. If the dominant, if most people, again, with this word dominant implies domination over, not just majority, not just this is what most people are, like we're making an observation. But you see, we wouldn't be teaching this to 8 and 9-year-olds in the first place. We wouldn't be even remarking on this. We wouldn't be going, hey, let's observe and, let's remark on the fact that, most people in America are white. We wouldn't even be teaching that unless there was some kind of value instruction going on. That's what they're doing. So I can sit here and dissect this for you and tell you how this is, a mixture of observations of reality and implications of negative reality, which is, of course, pseudo-reality. But so what? The only reason they're doing this with third graders is they want to send the message it's bad. Educated, educated, that's debatable, especially if they're going to schools like this. Able-bodied. Good. I mean, good. If most people in a culture are able-bodied, that means that most people are capable of taking care of themselves. It also means that there are enough people capable of taking care of themselves that they're probably also capable of, on a volunteer basis, I hope, helping to take care of people who are not able-bodied, either through science and medicine and technology or just volunteer work and helping. Okay? So, again, I don't see how this is bad. It does not mean that people who are not able-bodied are shunned or excluded or treated poorly, because they're not. Especially in this country, they're definitely not. As far as dominant culture being Christian, that's debatable. I would say it's secular. I would say it was Christian influence, but that's because Western culture was Christian influenced, Judeo-Christian influenced. But that doesn't mean that it's dominant Christian. We actually have a secular society. It's pluralistic. We have religious freedom in this country. So no, it's not dominant Christian. They didn't create it to hold power and stay in power. I would really love to see where you can find evidence of that in primary sources, that people created Western Enlightenment culture for the sole purpose of dominating and staying in power over other people, unless you want to argue that the people they wanted to stay in power over were barbarians. Yeah, were barbarians or people who were, want to be totalitarians or kleptocrats or thieves or thugs or racists or Nazis or something like that, then yes, I would say that, let's say, the greatest generation probably did want to hold power and stay in power in the Western world and have it not be the Nazis. Yeah, I would say that's fair. But again, it's contextual. It's not inherently bad. Holding power and staying power, if you are protecting individual rights, is a good thing, something I'd support 100%. Yes, I definitely am glad that the greatest generation risked their lives and fought to keep Western Enlightenment culture in power and not the crazy, lunatic, pseudo-realistic Nazi culture, which is against everything that the current dominant culture in the United States is supposed to stand for. So there's that. But let's see what these little 8 and 9-year-olds were told. The culture that is considered normal is what dominant culture is. No, that's not what it is. Created and maintained by those who belong in this culture to hold power and stay power. Who belong? Where's this word coming from? That's just to tell 8 and 9-year-olds that implies there are people who don't belong. And that's not true. That's not true. There's a Statue of Liberty standing in New York Harbor that says otherwise. Dominant culture in America, white, middle class, cisgendered, your gender identity matches the sex you were assigned at birth. That's all that cisgendered means, that your identity matches the sex you were assigned at birth, but you weren't assigned it. You weren't assigned your gender. It was observed. You came out of your mother, they observed the parts that you had and said, oh, it's a boy. Oh, it's a girl. That's not what you were assigned. The only people who are assigned a gender is when they actually cannot observe clearly what their gender is. And even then, that's not being really done anymore. It used to be done that way, but that is a teeny tiny, infinitesimally small percentage of people. Biologically, there's an observable gender at birth for the vast majority of babies born. And that's what they put on your birth certificate, is what they observed. That's it. You're not assigned it. It's observed. Observable fact. If you decide that does not fit with how you feel and you would like your gender identity to be reflected in some other way, that is something you can do when you're an adult, possibly even a teenager. But it's not what was assigned to you. It's not an assignment. I don't feel like somebody imposed upon me that I was female. They observed it, and I agree. Okay, educated. Again, not sure about that one. Able-bodied, we talked about that. Christian, we talked about it. English speaker. Yeah, that it's the majority language in the United States, but by no means the only one. We do not have an official language in America. We don't. Certainly not that our government forces anyone to speak. So you can speak whatever the heck you like. It is very costly to publish things in hundreds of languages on a government basis, which is why we don't tend to do that everywhere. So there is a dominant language, I guess, by virtue of the fact that, for practical reasons, you kind of have to keep it to be one or at least two, and ours are English and Spanish for obvious demographic reasons. But again, it's not a value judgment on the other languages. It's just efficient and a matter of costs. Okay. So it continues. There's more. Reading from this book is anti-racist. So there's a reading from this book is anti-racist. The teacher taught the children the theory of intersectionality and claimed that those with privilege have power over others, and that folks with an X who do not benefit from their social identities have little to no privilege and power, again with the victim oppressor rhetoric. They were divided into these two groups. They're victims and oppressors, and you're one or the other, and there's no nuance. It's just dividing people, segmenting people, and abusing young children who can't fight back. The teacher asked students to create an identity map listing their race, class, gender, religion, family structure. None of this is their business. This is all completely private. It's also really intrusive and creepy. Think of some of the characteristics they're asking. They're talking about things like gender, female, male, non-binary. These are 8 and 9-year-olds. What other information do they have to start talking about? All of this is optional, by the way, to disclose. You make it part of an assignment. The student in a class in 3rd grade doesn't realize that they don't have any obligation to divulge any of this. They don't have to complete this assignment. And yet they did. They were told to. This is just so inappropriate for an adult, a strange adult, to be talking to children about these topics and in this kind of othering way. It's anti-American. It just is. In a related assignment, the children were asked to write short essays describing which aspects of their identities hold power and privilege and which are oppressed, in effect ranking themselves according to the intersectional hierarchy. So now we're creating an artificial hierarchy within the classroom. How is this beneficial to anyone? Parents at the school were scandalized, thank goodness. They were basically teaching racism to my 8-year-old, said one parent who rallied half a dozen families to protest the curriculum and demanded a meeting with the principal. Thank goodness. This is significant. One Chinese American parent compared the training to the Cultural Revolution. Growing up in China, I had learned it many times. The outcome is the family will be ripped apart. Husband hates wife, children hate parents. I think it's already happening here. They're correct. It is happening here. Imagine the biracial children who are being taught this stuff. Luckily, the group of Asian American parents was able to shut down the training from the school, but they are worried the Cultural Revolution is spreading. We think some of our school board members are critical race theory activists, and they must go. I agree. They must go. But you can get your child away from this before you can deal with that. That it's actually going to be easier. First order of business is do no harm. Get your child out of this environment, because if it was there once, it can come back. If it's there and that's how the teachers really think, or that's what the teacher's been trained to think, what are you really going to get out of it realistically? There's this article, Woke Elementary. I will put it into the description box of this video. And so he's doing a 10-part investigative series in critical race theory and education, and he's looking for support. So if you're inclined to support him, please do. Somebody says, there's in a comment, and I want to touch on this. This is crazy, but calling it child abuse is counterproductive and doesn't help in the persuasion of the parents of these children against these lessons. Hyperbolic accusations only make them defensive. No, I disagree. Completely disagree. If there's one thing that parents do not want to be doing, it's abusing their children. I think it's on how you do it. I think someone would say I'm too forward in saying you're abusing your children, but the parents aren't doing it. The school is doing it. I'm saying if you leave your children in this environment, you're allowing it to happen. And that's why I want to make the case, and I think I am making a case based on fact that it is abuse, because what this does, aside from obviously teach the child about victimology, and when you do that, when you set up a dynamic where the child is either part of the oppressed group or part of the, so they're a victim or they're an oppressor, you are directly attacking, full frontal attack on their self-esteem and on their identity formation at a time when they are not even close to defining themselves outside their own family. That's how it breaks down the family unit, is because you are getting between a parent and their child. First thing, when a child is 8 or 9 and they're looking within their family unit, within their close circle for their identity, they're a sibling, they're a son, they're a grandson, they're a brother, or a cousin. Those are their identity markers. Maybe they're an American if you want to go really high level, but they don't see themselves beyond that. So you're getting in the way that you're saying that's a bad thing, or yeah, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing one way or the other. They either have power from that or they don't. So now it's a negative. And then you're trying to replace it with other things. And some of them they can't access. They can't be anything other than what they are. They can choose certain things. That's why you see people choosing to not be, cisgendered, or choosing to not be heterosexual. But the fact is, most of these things are immutable characteristics. So it creates a lot of stress. It creates a lot of anxiety in children, that who I am, that is beyond my control, and who my parents are, that's a bad thing. I'm either hurting someone or I'm being hurt by others. How that wouldn't be abuse, I really don't know, especially because it's not true. Especially because lying to children is abusive. You're stealing their right to the truth. They're stealing their right to learn how to understand what is true and what isn't true, using their own 5 senses to decide for themselves from within, and using their own the scientific method, using their ability to use reason and access information on their own without someone else giving it to them. That is abusive. You're depriving them of their birthright to be a rational thinking person. So whether you see that as abuse or not is immaterial. It is. And then when you double down, if they have the guts to say, this isn't me and I disagree with you, which I doubt an 8 or 9-year-old would, if you double down and say, you just don't understand, or yes, you are, and you contradict them, now you're gaslighting. Now you're literally verbally abusing them in a very specific way. So I disagree with that person. And I think parents need to understand it. They need to see it in such stark terms. I don't see any benefit to not doing that. If you're tepid about this, People might be persuaded that there's something okay about this, that it helps in some way. But I would challenge parents. How does it help? How does it help at its intended purpose? How does it reduce racism? It is racist. Segmenting children in a classroom is racist. It just is. I mean, there's like, please explain to me how it's not. So, anyway, that to me, I'm glad that the parents push back. I'm glad they recognize it for what it is. But part of why they recognize it for what it is they have memories themselves from where they came from in China. What about when this is happening in a place where it's not immigrant? You know, they're not first generation American or second generation American. What about when they don't know any different? They've grown up in the United States, and they didn't learn about Mao's China because they didn't teach it in school. I can tell you that right now. It wasn't taught to me till college. So, you know, and I was going to school in the 70s. So it wasn't taught to me at the height of, you know, the Cold War. I'm pretty sure it's not been taught to most parents of third graders today. That's the problem. So this is being taught to 8 and 9-year-olds. And I just want to share that with you because it is a classic example of the kind of pseudo reality they are creating, and they're exposing our children to, and they are asking them to accept a variety of premises that they are in no position to challenge as I've just done. The only reason I could just give you this video, that I could sit here and dissect it this way, is I know what do I know at 54 years of age? I know history they don't know. I've traveled to places they've never traveled to. I have looked at, you know, various issues from a political sense and an economic sense. You know, I've looked at these things over many decades, through the reading of, you know, current events, exposure to current events, talking to people, interacting with lots of different people, going to college. I mean, there are so many experiences, educational and life experiences that I've had that I can do what I just did. They facilitate my ability to do what I just did. An 8-year-old cannot have this conversation. They cannot even begin to understand this video. They can't understand the video challenging the crazy lesson that was put in front of them. And then to tell them that they now have to deconstruct this, that they have to challenge this, that these are power and privilege as if it's a bad thing. All of these negative implications is so damaging because they will accept it because they don't have anything else. They have no context with which to compare this. They don't even know that they should. The teacher is dominant in the classroom. This is abusive. This is the antithesis of education. This is indoctrination. If you're a parent watching this, you need to get your children away from people who do this to them as fast as humanly possible. Not only will you have to de-school them from this, you have to deprogram them from this, which will be difficult. It is a lot more difficult to deprogram than to program, especially a child. After years of this, it is extremely difficult. It is literally like deprogramming someone who's been through a cult indoctrination, who's been raised in a cult or raised in some kind of brainwashing center. It is so difficult. And to give you an idea of how difficult it is, when I was in college and I traveled to East Germany, I went to East Berlin briefly, and we had a short exchange with some East German university students. And we were limited in what we were able to say because we had a handler with us, but we were at least able to respond briefly to things we were told. At least we were allowed to contradict from our personal experience. That's as far as we could go. So students found out I was from New York City. That's where I lived at the time. And they said, how can you live there? It is just, aren't there needles all over the streets and, drugs everywhere and crime everywhere? Aren't you terrified to leave your house? Isn't it a scary, horrible, terrible place? It's so ironic because their description sounded like modern day San Francisco and, of course, increasingly parts of New York. But at the time, no, it really didn't describe New York City. It described some neighborhoods perhaps, but not all of it at all. Not only did they think that about New York, but they thought that pretty much every city in America was a war zone, just a place you couldn't be safe at all. And so I said, no, that doesn't describe my experience at all. And I got comments back that are very similar to what you hear now from people who are pushing this pseudo reality in this country. Oh, you probably just don't see it. You probably just don't realize it. You're used to it, aren't you? You're used to it, aren't you? So of course you don't see it. And I would have to say, no, I don't see it because it's not there. And they wouldn't believe me. They couldn't believe me. They had just, they couldn't. They refused to do it. The only way they could continue to function and not be intensely uncomfortable, you could see on their faces, was to decide that I was insane. I was not seeing reality correctly. They who had never set foot in New York City. The only thing they knew about New York City was what they'd been told by the communist government, their communist professors in East Germany at the time. They'd never been there, obviously. I lived there. I'm telling you, this is my experience. I live there. This is what I do every day. Oh, you poor thing. You just don't see reality. That was a communist country. Here we're in the United States of America, and there are teachers, there are adult trainers telling other adults, either poor you, good cop, you don't see it, you've internalized this problem and you're not literally living in reality properly, or bad cop, this just proves that you're an oppressor and you're a racist and you're a terrible person. Except we're talking about 8-year-olds, so they haven't even gotten to that point yet. They're just at the part where they're doing the indoctrination that the communist government did to those students when they were young, that made them the kind of young adults that could not possibly process what I was telling them. They couldn't do it. They could not do it. Don't let that be your child someday. So that concludes this sad little video. I really feel for the parents in this school, anybody who had a child go through this, because they're going to have to do a lot of deprogramming, and that presupposes the parent knows what to say and knows what to do, because they've probably gone through schools just like this. So if you find this content valuable, I hope you will subscribe, like, share, comment. That's the video.